Welcome back to Inflection Point, where we're going to continue to demystify succession and exit related planning issues. I'm Kevin Conner, the CEO of the Retirement Planning Group. We again are the dedicated fee-only 100% fiduciary firm. And I'm really lucky today. I don't just have Tom here joining me, one of the directors of corporate development. I also have Dan Mays. And well, Tom, you know everybody on planet Earth. I've yet to go anywhere where you don't know somebody.
Not just on this planet either.
I'm sure, for sure. I'm talking even outside the four walls of Cetera. I can't even go through an airport with you without you bumping into somebody you know. Dan, I know you're as famous as Tom is, but in the event that not everybody knows exactly what your role is, and I know you've been in this industry for, 75 years, why don't you spend a couple minutes and share with everybody what your exact role is at Cetera?
Great. Thanks, Kevin. Tom, for having me as part of Inflection Point today. I've been, as you said, with the organization here at Cetera for 18 years. I've been in the industry almost 25, and my grandfather retired from the industry years ago. So it's really been part of my DNA, if you will, just growing up and kind of getting brought up in the industry. My entire role here at Cetera has been focused on supporting advisors in a consulting capacity at one form or another. But for the last 10 years or so has really been focused exclusively with succession planning support for our affiliated advisors.
And just for transparency, Kevin, I should mention I've known Dan a long time. We've worked together in the trenches in this firm and some predecessor firms that have been acquired. Dan put the word succession into succession plans before people even knew what it was. So a lot of people were never prepared for what a succession plan was. People threw that word out there 20 years ago. To Dan's credit, I could say he's helped a lot of people achieve that goal and understand what true succession planning is all about. So thanks for being here, buddy.
Yeah, I think that's a major. I appreciated that about Cetera as a whole, being forward thinking about the advisors that are out there and maybe some of the risks that they're in. The crosshairs they could be in with regards to not having a plan. And that's where I wanted to spend a little bit of time with you, Dan. We throw around terms like succession plan, emergency plans. I think the term we use internally here is, continuity plan. Before we dive into some of these things, in your words, could you just explain how you explain to the advisors you work with, what is a continuity plan?
Yeah, thank you. I think that the biggest difference is whether it's a planned or an unplanned exit from the profession. Succession planning in generally is a planned exit. I'm going to retire or start a new charity or whatever it is that I'm no longer doing as a financial professional any longer. That's kind of a succession plan. We'd like to think about starting timing 3 to 5 years ahead of that exit just to make sure everything is done properly. Now, and there might be contingencies built in so that if something doesn't go just right, there's some contingencies built into that. But separately are advisors that aren't thinking about an exit. They still need what we would call a continuity plan, and that protects against unplanned exits, most commonly death or disability. It happens all too frequently at our firm, and I know across the profession. And we also know just not enough advisors have written plans in place to protect their business in the event of an unplanned exit.
So what does that engagement look like? I think, some people never want to go to the doctor because they don't want to know, right? But this doesn't have to be a scary endeavor at all. In fact, I think it should be an empowering one. I've said this to you before, you can either make the decision or the decision will be made for you. And the decisions that are made for you are oftentimes the hardest decisions to accept. And we've seen this with a couple of advisors. We've helped out a number of advisors that fell into the camp of having a terminal illness, and we stepped in and helped them monetize their business at the last minute. But what does an engagement look like? What does typically the first phone call go like? What should they expect as a part of the process?
Well, I think it's really just to understand their objectives as a business owner. And we talk a lot about growth and about forward planning and supporting that growth as an organization here at Cetera. But in my role, I always want to make sure that they've got that insurance in place. It doesn't have to be a policy, but more of a plan in place that says, here's what happens if I'm not around anymore. There's going to be another advisor identified. Price and terms are defined in that agreement. It doesn't have to be a 400-page manifesto, but it probably needs to be something a little bit more substantial than an email saying, hey,
Right.
if something happens, give my business to Tom, right? I think that at the end of the day, as easy as we all want to kind of make things as humans, the reality is the transfer of a business has some components that need to be thought through. And we have a lot of experience in helping advisors think through what those issues are so that it can all be documented in a written document and put in place somewhere for them.
So what are like, give an example of the three things an advisor, or a handful of things the advisor could think about before that, your questions you're going to ask. Let's give a scenario here. Like what question would you ask? So before they call, if they were to call you, and hopefully everybody has a continuity plan. Again, we talked about this on the last episode, Tom. Everybody listening that's building an advisory practice has probably, if not the most valuable asset on their balance sheet. It's second most valuable asset on the balance sheet. And, unfortunately, not everybody has a continuity plan. So what are the sort of questions they would need to be prepared to have thought about? You mentioned one, who, like if something happened to you, who's going to step in, right? Beyond that.
Well, I think let's go back a step. You mentioned that everybody should have one, but I think as an industry, the statistics are a little bit all over the board, but I think the most common range is we see that 70% of advisors do not have a written continuity plan in place. There's some other statistics that would indicate that a very small percentage of those that say they do have plans are actually legally binding effective contracts. So there's a huge opportunity. I think the biggest hurdle that we have to face with advisors is take a step, concentrate on your business for a change. You're busy worrying about your clients, worrying about your family, you're busy business owners, but let's take a few minutes to invest the time and a few resources to ensure that you're protecting this. If you decide that you don't want to plan as a business owner, I think that's great, as long as it's a decision that you're making as a proactive fashion. But as you mentioned, we're all exiting this world at some point or another, and this is a critical component. So that's the biggest hurdle that I think we have to overcome, is just get used to the idea that you as a business owner should have one.
I want to jump in here because isn't it interesting? I heard the statistic that Dan just talked about, 70%, right? And that number fluctuates, but isn't it interesting that the advisor who is in place to give great advice to their client, right? Oftentimes their client owns a business, and that advisor is probably giving them advice on how
make sure you bulletproof this
yourself,
yeah.
But that advisor isn't doing the same thing for themselves. It's amazing. It's like going to a doctor that says don't smoke, but he's smoking, right?
Yeah.
So, it's really a crazy phenomenon that I think Dan's right. When they say 70% don't have it, they probably don't have a binding contract. They think they have something in their file that says something happens to me, please give this to someone else. But that's not the best thing for their family, right? Because it's an asset. Giving it away doesn't help your family if you own that business. So talking with Dan helps them get to a point where if something does happen, that asset is worth something to your family.
Yeah. Showing up with zero documentation and leaving a spouse in the position of, I really don't know what's going on. He or she took care of the entire business. Dan, unfortunately, I'm meeting you for the first time. And now we're trying to, and we went through this in the upper Northwest. We had an advisor, and luckily he did have a document in place, but we met his wife for the first time. And I know that took a tremendous amount of pressure off of her. And we were, fortunately, when Cetera brought this to us to take care of, we had a team of advisors that flew up there with a team of CPAs that sat down with the clients in 48 hours notice, a SWAT team essentially we put together, and went up there and really took care of it. But had that document not been in place, it would have been weeks.
Well,
it would have been
not just weeks, but the legalities that go into trying to put something together when a catastrophic event has already happened. Right? Yep. Now you've got the other pieces of the puzzle on the other side, that how do I make sure that we do this legally, right? to take care of that family. But now this is, unfortunately, after someone passed, someone died. That's really difficult. You've got laws, attorneys, estates, everything involved, and you probably have some other advisor within that business that thinks it's theirs.
Well, yes, if you have a junior advisor on staff that thought, well, I'm taking care of all of this. If they don't have the junior advisor on staff, I know one of the things we were able to sidestep is there's privacy issues with regards to clients' data. And so there's certain things that can be shared and not shared. And so having that documentation in place that says, I've anointed this to happen next as the advisor that's managing this book and owns this book of business, then that becomes immeasurable. It's incredibly valuable at the point of again, at an inflection point for that advisor in their career path.
And I think that's we're touching on the main theme here, which is there's a regulatory framework in which we have to operate. And and if there's an advisor that's not there any longer, there's still a regulatory framework to ensure that those clients are going to be serviced. Ideally, there's also parallel to that a process that will ensure the value of the business is transferred to the family, that we're able to satisfy all the regulatory nuances. But there's also business, personal, estate planning issues that also may be in play. So in an ideal world, that document is in place long before a triggering event because it can help answer a number of questions.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, let's face it. When an advisor is no longer there in an unplanned exit, it's a traumatic event by definition. Everybody at this firm springs into action to do whatever we can, and having a document makes it exponentially more easy, if you will, to ensure that the advisor's objectives can be accomplished.
How much time does an advisor, when you engage with somebody, they call you up and say, look, I don't have anything in place. I'm 40, I don't have anything in place. I'm 50, I don't have anything in place. I'm 60, 70, I don't have anything in place. I know you get these calls. It's interesting. Well, let me ask the first question. What is the duration of time for someone to get something in place?
From start at zero, right? And if you have another advisor that you think would be a good continuity partner for your firm, you're going to need to have discussions about what you both think would be an ideal outcome, what you think the valuation process should look like, so that if there is a triggering event, we understand the value of the business, some deal structures. You're probably going to want to hire an attorney and a CPA to make sure everything is buttoned up well. So if you're working at an aggressive pace, you can be done within a couple of weeks, period. If you don't have an advisor, Cetera, like many other firms, has a program where we'll be your continuity partner. And we can go from start to full continuity agreement in as little as a couple of weeks. It includes evaluation, it includes contracting. And so we've taken steps to make it as seamless as possible. But it can stretch out for months. But that's typically because advisors are having a hard time coming to alignment on issues.
And oftentimes I've seen this happen in Dan's role. Someone is thinking about succession, right? They're with Cetera. They're in that age bracket where they know they have to put something in place. By the time that concludes, they may be coming back to Dan and saying, this is a great exercise, but maybe I should actually sell my business now.
Right. Yeah.
It's taught me some lessons and some aha moments that I wasn't thinking about. So maybe it is time for me to put this business into the right hands and do it on my timeline, not someone else's, right? And do it now. So Dan then has to flip that switch and say, great, we can acquire your business now and make sure that it's done properly, legally, with the best interest at heart for your clients, which is what you as an advisor want at the end of the day.
It takes the pressure off of you, your family, and your clients. Because let's face it, how many times has a client come to an advisor saying, hey, we love you, but what happens if? If they're not asking, they're thinking these things
100%,
because ours isn't the only aging profession out there. And so what this does is it allows you to be able to communicate to your clients, take all of that pressure off of their mind, take it off of yours. You don't have to worry about that anymore. You can start focusing on the things that are going to drive growth for your firm. And then to your point, if we're closer to that point in time where we think about an exit should really be defined anyway, this is a great foundation to start with because it really helps you walk through some of the more important issues to be thinking about from a planned exit point of view as well.
Well, plus it's easier on the clients also, right? So we've got 12,000 advisors within Cetera, right? there's plenty of opportunity to make sure that those clients are
Landed a good home.
right, landing in a good home, right? Everything stays the same for the customer, right? So that's really the result at the end of the day, that if you promise this to your clients, right? If something happens to me, I'm going to make sure you're in good hands. And I think that's what Dan brings to the table to make sure that happens.
You know, I have to ask, you know, you mentioned the statistic that 70% don't have anything. And, you know, I imagine, maybe a bit of a leading question here, but I imagine pre-COVID, post-COVID, you know, a lot of us, you know, went into that very scary time. No one really knew. I remember advisors calling me in Kansas City saying, if something happens to me, would you step in? And it was a phone call.
Yeah.
You know, it's just it happened to be another firm in town. If something happens to us, would you step in and take care of the family? And I said, yes, I've known you for 20 years. Of course, we would step in. But like that's, you know, it's a phone call. That means zero at the end of the day when it comes to that. What sort of trends have you seen with continuity plans pre-COVID versus post-COVID, specifically with the advisors you're working with?
Unfortunately, human nature hasn't changed much for millennia, right? But I think what happened with things like, you know, going back several years to 2008 with market disruption or other times where there was huge market disruption, you see people start to engage in peaks during those time periods. With COVID, we had a huge increase in the number of conversations we were having with advisors. It was really important, top of mind. You know, there were examples of advisors who were passing away because of COVID, and we took some steps to put some things in place in response to the pandemic. But I think what happens is, as things start to calm down, people's memories start to fade, and we're focused on the next thing, right? So the reality is we're past COVID to a point now where we've lost that spike in conversation. But there certainly was a bigger focus on it during that period of time. Call it, you know, 24 months when things were really at its peak.
Yeah, it's like you dodged a bullet. Now I think everything's okay.
Yeah.
Right. But
yeah.
Look, there is another bullet coming, whether you want to admit it or not. You just don't know when that bullet's coming. But again, be prepared for it. That is what you should be doing if you own your business.
Yeah, I agree. It's one of those nagging things as an advisor, you know, I had in the back of my head, we had a buy sell within our organization. Yeah. Okay. But that's only so good as you can get life insurance, right? And that's hard to do if you're further along in your career and you're going to go out and try to get life insurance for a buy sell for some short period of term. It makes no sense whatsoever. I think that's one of the big benefits to having Cetera's backing is to step in and being able to take care of the family with, you know, some sort of continuity plan. You know, I really appreciate you coming here today, Dan. It's very helpful to hear. You know, I think, you know, for advisors, you shouldn't engage in this because you're scared of it. You should engage in it because it should be succession should be an empowering feeling. Like you take control. Look, all the advisors I talk to, for the end of the day, myself included, are a lot of control freaks, for being honest with ourselves. Okay. We want to control these situations. We want to try to control the outcomes for clients. We want to control what's going on with the businesses. But you know what? We're not going to try to control this situation. And I don't know if it's because we're having to come with grips with our own mortality, or that we might, you know, we don't want to be the statistic and it's not going to happen to us. But it should be an empowering thing that advisors look at and say, I now have control over all aspects of my business. And so hopefully, you know, this podcast today will you know, shed some light on this, that it doesn't have to be a overburdensome process. It doesn't need to be a scary process. At the end of the day, it's kind of like getting your own personal estate planning done. You walk out of there and you're like, got that done. Throw that on the shelf. I don't have to worry about it. And you can move on with your life. And like you said, Tom, focus on the things that are growing the business and not have this dangling thing hanging out there. So with that,
and I would just add one little quick comment to that. Cetera is aligned to support advisors in this process. I know from talking with our colleagues across the profession that most firms are also focused on this and have resources aligned there. There are third-party firms that can help. There are resources to be able to help advisors get these things in place, to be empowered, to answer questions for your family, to answer questions that your clients are having of you. And if you decide not to, as an affirmative choice, fantastic. Then we've done our job to make so that you've made an informed decision. But if you have questions about that, call us, call somebody, because we're really passionate to make sure this is in place for every advisor.
You touched on something I think that we could end on. Advisors can take the succession process. We're always trying to drive value for our clients, right? Trying to drive value for our clients. This year, what value can I give them? A talking point to your clients can be, I just want you to know, I went through a process and I have an entire succession plan built if something happens to me. That's a valuable attribute because the clients do not want to go to the yellow pages and figure out what their next step's going to be if there is no succession plan. And so with that, I really encourage advisors to reach out.
And yeah, you're right. And they won't even find the yellow pages, Kevin.
No.
It doesn't even exist any longer.
No, you're right. There is no
Right?
more
There's
yellow
no
pages.
yellow pages.
So what are we going to do? We're
Right.
going to Google our
So
way
now
into
they've
a
got
solution.
now they've got a 20-year-old person calling them saying, "I'm your new advisor."
Yeah.
Right? And that's nothing to take away from a 20-year-old. Right? We were all 20 years old, but that's not setting up your clients for success.
No.
Right?
No.
So I think Dan is right. Call us. We're here. We're here to help. We'll give you an honest answer. And if we just become friends along the way, that's great.
Yep.
But we're going to give you an honest answer based on our experience.
Great.
Well, again, Dan, I appreciate you being here. Tom, I'm kind of okay with you being here, but thanks for being here.
Appreciate
you
your
very much.
time.
So with that, if you're concerned about succession planning, I encourage you to reach out. When we move this podcast along, Inflection Point is about these exact moments and how you address them. And we will be uncovering and, like I said earlier, continuing to demystify what this process looks like as we're moving forward. So thank you very much.